Hello, I'm Sarah Russell, former producer of the ADHD Skills Lab. I'm thrilled to introduce my latest project, the Neurodivergent Report, an educational podcast dedicated to empowering neurodivergent individuals with accessible scientific knowledge and amplifying their exuberant stories. In each episode, we'll explore topics like the genetics and heritability of neurodiversity, alongside practical strategies for managing executive dysfunction and emotional dysregulation. Together, we can learn to heal in community. However you are able to engage, thank you for being here.
I want your honest opinion because I can't tell if I'm like, ooh, this is a bar. Like, Current Neuro-divergEVENTS. Is that bad?
NYT.
It's a little clunky.
It looks good written.
Yeah. I just wanted to be a silly little goose.
If you say it, you can make it happen.
And we're here with our first episode of Current Neuro-divergEVENTS. Nope. I don't think it's gonna work, but that's okay.
Yes. I mean, we are really just trying to figure it out, like with a new segment today of current events. There's a lot of shenanigans going on in the media right now.
Right.
And
Right.
yeah, we just wanted to enter the ring, you know?
Because I don't know about you, but I've been a little heated these past few days.
Yeah, I mean, when your entire community is under attack, sometimes you feel like you've got to jump in the ring and like say some things, especially since we've both spent the last several years just learning about ADHD and neurodivergence.
Over the past handful of years, I feel like we're finally just making strides to have a good understanding of what neurodivergence is. Like,
it's extremely disappointing.
Like how people mask, how people compensate, and now it feels like we're taking steps backward, like right when we were kind of like getting to a place where it's like, oh, okay, like, so it's a little bit disheartening, and I want to do everything I can to push back, but also to make sure that as many people as I can reach them and be like, hey, this is information that is not true, but also this is how you could combat misinformation when it comes up in your own life.
Yeah, because as usual, this kind of misinformation is only going to harm the most vulnerable of us.
Yeah.
That teenage autistic boy who was just shot in his backyard.
Yeah.
Because he didn't present like a safe neurotypical child would. Right. We needed to mention him as well. Victor Perez. Taking a moment.
Yeah.
This episode is for all of us. Some of us have insulating privilege, you know, my whiteness, my education, where I live, you know, social class. Those all protect me from some of the more oppressive harms of ableism. But neurodivergence advocacy and information is for all of us, not just the ones with access to more resources. That is the epistemic injustice that we were talking about episodes ago.
Yeah. I think it's also the kind of thing, like, if you're someone out there who maybe does not have all the privileges that we necessarily have, like, I also want to amplify those voices. And if you have an interest and ability to come on this show,
or even if you just want to message with us in private, I would still love to get to know you.
Yeah. Well, on that note.
Yeah, no, this was super important to like have that happen. We can't just talk about like the misinformation and the ways that it makes us uncomfortable without also talking about the ways that this misinformation actually causes real harm to real people who really exist.
Yeah.
Anyway, so like recently, the New York Times Magazine published an opinion piece that makes me really glad that I no longer subscribe to the New York Times. I reached out through my neurodivergent community network, and I found someone who was able to gift me this article, Mutual Aid in Action.
Yes. Yeah.
So we're going to talk about that a little bit. We're going to talk about sort of the attitude refutation of it. We're going to talk about Russell Barkley's sort of video series about it. This is quite the attack on all of the information that we already have to date. And I think it's just being repackaged in a way that is clickbaity and going to sell, you know, I don't know, something. I mean, what do they sell to people who are in fear?
Yeah. And I mean,
lies usually.
Yeah. To
Mhm.
preface, there's a lot of bold claims about what ADHD is and isn't, and none of it is really backed up by a ton of scientific literature, especially because all of the scientific literature currently has a very strong narrative about what ADHD is. And now the New York Times is reporting on, I think, one study and saying now that this is like this whole big thing and changing how everybody's thinking about ADHD, which is just not true. Like I remember getting up one morning and reading about this. Like, I think I read an article from a more local news source that was reporting on it and just being confused just about like how they're making these claims without really any basis.
I wouldn't want to be the editor that greenlit this article.
Yeah. Especially because
And
again,
that's all I'm going to say.
we got Russell Barkley on the response here.
Yeah, we're going to make sure to link the content that we're referencing to the best of our ability. Obviously, this New York Times article is not free, so I cannot share that. But yeah, moving on. Okay, so since this is sort of a new format, you might not know what to expect, but we're going to try to stay true to the research episodes as much as possible. You know, we're always going to quote the article. We're going to intersperse a little bit with our commentary, but will be very obvious which is which. Yeah. And not just Russell Barkley, but like other content creators, you know, I think I've seen more commentary about this piece than I think the author was expecting, or maybe not. Maybe he's like gearing up for like to write a book. Maybe he wants some publicity. But guy named Paul Tuff recently wrote an article called "Have We Been Thinking About ADHD All Wrong?" And I mean, that is a personal question that I have been asking myself for years now. I've been reading research specifically on ADHD pretty much for the better part of the last 4 years. And yeah, I've been wondering if like, yeah, are we thinking about ADHD all wrong? But like the way that this guy talks about it is not the vibe. And we're going to get into why that is.
Not only just how what he's saying again is against the current scientific understanding and he really doesn't have any basis for his claims, but it's actively harmful and it's actively dismissing the real experiences of people that do have ADHD, and also ignoring professionals in the field. And we will again get into all of that. But one thing, and I believe this was a quote from the article, is like, it's not enough to admit science was wrong. And to make that kind of claim, again, discrediting all of the scientific literature currently in your article.
This is a reactionary piece.
Yeah.
And it's not like a well-structured argument. It's meant to prey on your emotions. It uses language that is very like, it doesn't directly come right out and say a harmful, inflammatory thing, but it like sort of implies it asks a question and then it doesn't answer the question. I want to talk about Paul. Okay, I want to talk about who Paul is.
Yeah.
Because his bio on the New York Times says he's been writing on child development for the last 20 years, and I'm like, really? Okay, all right, okay, but I do want to emphasize he's not a mental health professional. To my knowledge, I don't know his personal life. He might have ADHD. Actually, this piece reads like someone who has personally asked that question. He sounds like someone who is trying to understand themselves, but also lacks the education to properly disseminate the information he's consuming.
And on top of that, you said that he was writing for like 20 years. And then to have, again, we will get into specifically why, to have such sloppy reporting and just irresponsible like use of quotes out of context. Like, I don't understand how you can be writing for 20 years and be a professional and do this just horrible of a job. I'm sorry. Accurately representing the things that the information you're pulling.
This just reads like someone who is garnishing publicity for themselves.
He's making these bold claims without any basis for them. He's also saying a lot about how ADHD is conceptualized. Like he said, it's marketed as a neurobiological disorder, but then he says it's marketed as such, but then does not say what he actually thinks it is, and what his counter to that is. He's just saying, oh, it's just not this.
Yeah. Paul, if you want to get in touch and let me know what you personally think about ADHD, I would love to have you on the show or even just talk to you in private.
Yeah.
Because I think that I think that we could find a lot of common ground here, and I think that we could both maybe help each other come to a better understanding about this whole situation.
I feel like you're
Let's
being
do a
very
little
kind,
flip
Sarah,
it.
and I'm sorry that I'm being like really harsh, but I just think again for someone who's like this is your profession, you are either purposefully being irresponsible or just incompetent at your job. And we can cut this out if you think that's too
No,
harsh.
I think we should keep it. The good cop, bad cop is really good.
Oh,
It's really good. And I think that he does, I mean, he obviously does deserve the criticism. Like
yeah.
but he might be expecting this. Again, I'm just trying to see how this all unfolds. I don't know. And that's how I went into the article. Okay. I went into the article. I was like, okay, everybody's really upset about this, but like, I need to just try to like find the baby in the bathwater, right? I need to find like the value in this and really try to see what the author is trying to do here. And so like, I took notes on my like, my pre-read. I was like, ooh, this title is just clickbaity. I was like, this person is just looking for attention. They just want to go viral. Honestly, my post opinion obviously doesn't largely differ, but as I was reading it, I empathized a lot with the person. Like I said, it seems like he's trying to understand maybe himself or someone he loves, but at the very least, he's trying to understand a very complex topic without the education to give him the foundational knowledge to talk about that topic. He should have gone and talked to like some 101 professors, I think, and maybe could have avoided all of this.
I mean, this is according to the ADDitude response, which is for people who are like listening. It's ADD and then ITUD. They're like a pretty reputable like ADHD.
They are like one of the number one publications for
Yeah.
ADHD. Yeah,
But
research fact. It's like WebMD for ADHD.
yes. And the thing is, I think Sarah, like, I think it's really great that you want to come at this like an empathetic response. And I don't know this man, so you could be right. But at the same time, you just said, oh, we could have maybe talked to like, some professors, but they have a source, and again, we can get into it more, that says that he purposefully ignored criticism from professors and people like in the field. And it just
I did read that specifically. He denied any requests to edit his information.
Yeah, like
people basically reached out to him and were like, hey, this is wrong.
Yeah.
Hey, you misquoted me here. And he was like, fuck off.
Yeah, basically.
Or actually ghosted. It's totally the mom in me. I've been consuming a lot of like conscious discipline literature and social and emotional learning stuff. And a big tenet of that is like assuming positive intent. Like in order to be a good parent, you need to be compassionate. And in order to be compassionate, sometimes you need to assume that the other person didn't mean it. Like you have to assume positive intent. And that is increasingly difficult for adults. And yet I persist.
And it's a valiant effort. It's a valiant effort.
Okay. Paul seems to think that there is one gene that creates ADHD. And because we haven't found it, it means it's not a genetic thing. And I think what research actually has found is that there's like over 3,000 genes that contribute to the expression of ADHD in someone's body. So there isn't one, there's thousands.
He's claiming that ADHD is not a biological condition, which he's not only claiming that because there's no genetic marker, but he's also saying that the way that it's diagnosed is subjective. He's also questioning medical treatment and kind of demonizing medical treatment and medical intervention. And there's a few problems with this. Number one is that there are many neurodevelopmental or neurobiological conditions that we do not currently have a marker for. You don't need a specific genetic marker to see that something is hereditary. We can get into that. On top of it, is that we can know that ADHD is some kind of biological mechanism, because how else would you explain how stimulants react one way in someone that has ADHD versus not? And lastly, where his argument is about it's subjective measures to get diagnosed is, number one, in certain areas, we actually just talked to someone today who talked about how she was diagnosed.
Same. Yeah.
I'm
so frustrated.
Yeah. How she was diagnosed was her psychiatrist put her like on different doses of Ritalin, and also a placebo and tested to see how she reacted. So not only can that be one way you diagnose someone, but also there's like brain scans and stuff. But even if you're talking about just the subjective measures part of it, like that is how you diagnose psychological conditions. So to say that it is like null and void just because it's subjective measures that people quote unquote made up is very misleading, because you could argue that anything with the brain is subjective because we can't see what happens in the brain. So like that's why there's different DSMs that come out. Like we learn more and we figure out what something is, and it just feels again very irresponsible to me. But yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely always dangerous to like cast doubt over the experts that have spent their lives studying this information. And it's extremely cocky to think that you can spend even a year, but he definitely didn't spend that long, but he said he did spend a year writing this article that will never surpass someone's decades of research experience and like personal experience interacting with that population as well in a clinical setting. I mean, I have been a victim of misdiagnosis. And so I think in almost every single research episode, I will complain about the subjectivity of diagnosis. But I also recognize that there is currently no blood test for ADHD. I recognize I can't pee in a cup and have someone tell me if I'm ADHD. I also recognize that that is less helpful than someone telling me that I struggle with impulsivity. Also. So I think our friend Paul is asking the wrong questions. He might be desperate for answers, as are many parents, but he's asking the wrong questions because we've already, like he's not proposing any novel ideas with this article. I found it very difficult to sort of figure out like, well, what's the point of this other than fear mongering? Because we already know like not a ton has changed with stimulants. We know that like society still has a long way to go to accommodate the neurodivergent. There's dozens of articles and books and like hundreds and thousands of content creators already saying that.
Yeah.
Welcome to the party.
We're happy to have you.
Yeah. Let's get together and like get on the same page about this.
Yeah.
Because giving misinformation language to people who are desperate for answers is just a recipe for disaster.
We're also desperate for...
It's trying to sell hope.
Yeah. And it's also it's people who are desperate for solutions now, because ideally people wouldn't have to be on medication if they don't have to be. Like I'm all for that, but this feels like an argument to say why medication is bad. He's saying that both stimulant medication is addictive, but he also was talking about it not being effective because people stop taking it, which just doesn't make sense. Like, is it addictive or do people not take it? It's just, that's a contradiction. And then also,
but it's a common contradiction. It's just what's out there already in the public discourse. It's almost like someone went looking for a bunch of these types of opinions and just threw them all together in an article.
Yeah.
I mean, specifically, other critiques of this are that he left out researchers who disagreed. Like, he literally cherry-picked who he spoke to.
He did not a thorough job because he's ignoring a lot of the experiences of real people. I mean, there were even quotes from the ADDitude response of their readers submitting to them quotes like, if they mess with my stimulants or access to stimulants, I could lose my job or even my marriage. I rely on it to maintain focus as a design engineer. And then people saying that the discourse is frustrating because it's being steered from the top by someone so willfully ignorant, bringing out everybody who is totally misinformed about ADHD. And even if you're not looking at personal like anecdotes from people, if you look at the statistics, again, this is from that ADDitude article, which we can get more into in a second. Being on stimulants when you have ADHD reduces the risk of premature death by 19%. ADHD medication has reduced the risk of overdose by 50%. Patients with ADHD treated with stimulant medications experience a 60% reduction in substance use disorders compared to those who do not take stimulant medication and have ADHD. These are not just numbers. All these numbers are made up of real people. And yes,
it's almost like abstinence only education doesn't work.
Oh my God. And it's the kind of thing where like, if again, if we lived in some kind of structured society where we are like where everyone understood different neurotypes and we all built a society together that supported everybody, and like kind of in that neurodiverse model that we talked about in like the foundations of neurodivergence, where everybody learns adaptive skills to take part in society, but society is also accepting and wanting to understand how everybody works. Yes, then probably these statistics that I just read wouldn't be the same, because maybe there wouldn't be as much premature death because people are not unable to live their lives. But yes, so did you want to kind of get more into now the response from ADDitude, because I've mentioned it a few times.
So yeah, like a few days later, ADDitude Magazine put out an article called Setting the Record Straight About ADHD and Its Treatments, where it pretty much just called out this article and said that it used cherry-picked data, it misquoted their own articles, and accused him of spreading dangerous, like, stigmatizing narratives at a time where, like, we're just getting past that.
Yeah.
And we're going to link that article in the show notes if you want to read it in full detail.
Yes, we will.
It gets really into this very specific misquotings
Of their own articles and how
of their
of their literally their own work.
So it seems like the author of the New York Times article picked on specific researchers, like
what his first name is, but
Dr. Crenshaw, who also tried to correct this information before it was published. It says, Crenshaw told a Times fact checker before the article was published that the reporter's information was incorrect and asked for an interview to set the record straight. None was granted. That's unprofessional and dangerous.
And he also chose...
I feel like he knows exactly what he's doing.
That's what I mean. That's what I was kind of alluding to in the beginning, which I think it was very kind of you to try to give, that...
I went into it, like, really just trying to be like, okay, we're all just doing our best. We're all just trying to understand. Because that's very much the vibe in my, like, 91% white suburban rural town. We're all just doing our best for our kids. We're all just trying our best. But are we? Or are some people trying to make money on the backs of other people suffering?
Yeah. And ADDitude also talks about, too, in a similar area, that he chose not to interview any, esteemed physicians or researchers or clinical psychologists that are at the forefront of ADHD care, and instead decided to, again, cherry pick and misrepresent information from ADDitude's own website.
Like, no, Paul.
No. My goodness. Hold on, let me take a second. I wrote so many fucking things, and I just have to like hone in on what I'm trying to say right now. Oh my God.
I'm not trying to be mean. It's just...
No.
It's so confusing to me.
I know.
Yeah, it's so I mean, I am someone who is constantly confused by the incompetence that I see in the world. I'm like, how do you
get to where you are?
How do you pay your bills on time?
Yeah.
It's hard for me to mail things. How are you doing it? You're a mess. But see, that's my own, that's me being judgmental and maybe me not understanding another neurotype. So that's why I just constantly am trying to be compassionate, because I know that I've got my own stuff, right?
That we would want the same.
Anyway.
If you want, we can transition more into Russell Barkley's response.
I mean, so Russell Barkley, took us to school.
Yeah.
ADDitude was trying to defend itself and its own publications. It was doing a little bit of PR, but also hopping into the moment. And Russell Barkley got mad.
Yeah.
He took it personally because he spent the last 50 years in ADHD research. And you think that you can take a year and you're gonna
coming directly for his work too. Say if his main claim
quoted him multiple times. Yeah, literally. The New York Times article quoted Russell Barkley multiple times, but they didn't actually interview him. They just pulled quotes from the internet.
Exactly. And also just completely going against all of his work with no basis, saying that ADHD is not biological, yet while there is no genetic marker for ADHD, there is a very clear heritability, which is what Russell Barkley has done. Like I said before, while there is no genetic marker, but there is heritability, there's also not identifiable biomarkers for a handful of psychiatric, neurodevelopmental, and neurodegenerative
for pretty much any psychiatric condition. Like, that's why psychology gets so much flack, okay? He spent a long time doing longitudinal research on ADHD populations. Russell Barkley has spent decades doing this research. He's written many papers, he's written books, he's done, like, I think clinical practice, like actually working with people. And I know in his later years, he has really spearheaded efforts to prove, well, to convince the public that ADHD doesn't disappear when you turn into an adult. Because that was the prior misconceptions that people grew out of ADHD, and maybe people with enough money do. Okay, maybe you can have enough resources to grow out of dysfunction from being forced into an institutionalized setting.
Yeah. But that doesn't mean it no longer doesn't exist. And for a lot of people, it's probably just learning to mask.
So Russell Barkley put out 4 videos. They're all about 30 minutes each, and I listened to them on 2 times speed so that it wasn't so much. But they really tear this article apart. And like I said, take us to school. So I'm just going to break down the 4 parts. Basically, the first video, if you want to watch it, talks about the MTA study that was misrepresented in the New York Times article. It talks about the author's lack of expertise and the vague and manipulative language that is used. That's Russell Barkley's opinion. And then in part 2, it's very much like a I was there moment where he just sort of fact checks all of the article's claims about meds and how, like, yeah, you're saying this, but also that's lacking this amount of context. And so basically just trying to, like, give context to what this man is talking about. Part 3 is, like, strongly worded refutations on, like, the misunderstandings about ADHD brains and genetics. And he specifically talks about reporting by omission. So very much the concept of, like, yeah, you're not coming right out and saying that we should get rid of ADHD meds and that people should stop taking them, but also you're heavily implying that people are misinformed themselves for using them.
Or doing some kind of harm to themselves by using them.
Yes, that's a much better way to say it. I actually made a note about that one because someone in the comments of that video called that a body slam to the author of the New York Times article. I was like, oof. And then part 4 is he brings in the Swedish registry, which we haven't talked about yet on this podcast, but I talked about a lot on my other podcast. Really quickly, this in Sweden, they have a national registry of, like, health information and data, and it starts, like, from when you're born and it goes. And we're not going to talk about, like, privacy implications of this or any of that. We're just going to say that it is a phenomenal source of data on, primarily white people. We really use data from the Swedish registry to make large sweeping claims because the sample size will be, like, in the hundreds of thousands. And we can really start to see things like family dynamics. And one really important reason why he brought up the Swedish registry is because there was a time before Sweden allowed stimulants, and specifically around stimulants make you short. They found that was a claim that
like
was
coffee. I've heard that, like, coffee makes.
Yeah, that was a claim being made in the New York Times article that there's a study that it makes you shorter. But actually, that was just a small sample size study. And when you actually look at it on the population scale, like you can in Sweden from before and after they allowed stimulants, you'll find no significant difference in the height of the population. So that's just why study design matters. And just making claims about research is not
science.
That's not reporting.
I'm interested to get into these the strongest hits in Sarah's counter to Barkley over here.
You're right, because there's so much tea in that section.
I know.
Okay, so Russell Barkley comes right out and he says, we are not educated by this article, we are misled. The point of reporting is, at the very least, to be educated on a new topic or to be informed about a topic. And we're not informed by this article. He also brings up the point that back in the 90s, when there was a very anti-stimulant push, like, oh no, you're gonna medicate your kids, that was a propaganda campaign spearheaded by the Church of Scientology. And I also think that it's very problematic that Matt Walsh has come out to cite the New York Times article as like everything he understands about ADHD.
Interesting. What is that?
Everything I already believe.
How do you know that? Because what is that based off of, considering that
It
there's
makes
no support?
Yeah, I mean, it sort of makes me think that, like, in the right-wing male influencer
Sphere.
counterculture, there are people who are just desperately trying to understand themselves and maybe just don't know how to love other people because they also don't give compassion to themselves for their own neurodivergence. And so I wonder if we need to start a deprogramming campaign and start reaching out with love.
Yeah.
And I will say, I didn't fully agree with Russell Barkley on like one thing that he said. He basically was talking about like the medical model and the society thing. And he was like, we don't need to re engineer society for neurodivergence or for ADHD people. And I was like, whoa, 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 whoa.
Hold on.
Hold the phone, friend, because like this isn't just for ADHD folks. This is for all of the neurotypes that don't like fit the mold. This is for all of the people who struggle with impulsivity, because it's not just ADHD. This is for all the people. This is to help all the people who struggle with brain fog, because it's not just ADHD.
Yeah.
Okay, we need to learn how to accommodate all of the members of society, and that can start with ADHD folks. That can start with autistic folks. That can start with keeping our ramps so that wheelchair people can access public spaces. So, sorry, Russell, but like, I disagree.
Yeah.
We do need to change society.
I think we've talked about this before, but I want to reiterate it again. Like the idea that talking about the way you're feeling and how you're experiencing things is a normal, healthy thing to do. It's the only way that we can make progress in making sure that everybody is doing well. It should be normalized to give the people the accommodations that they need. I think you talked about it with Soul, but he was saying that like an accommodation is literally stairs. Like hotels are called like accommodations because like they help you to have like a place to sleep. Like accommodations are just things that help you. And just because of those accommodations look different for different people doesn't mean that they don't deserve those accommodations. So I think just having that mindset shift for, not just ADHD folks, not just autistic folks, anybody who needs any kind of help with whatever it is. And then maybe if we lived in a society like that, we wouldn't even necessarily need the labels of ADHD and autism. It would just be, we just are.
We just have the vocabulary to advocate for our actual needs.
Yeah.
Because we're like not stigmatized for sharing, like, oh yeah, I can't read like out loud from a paper, you know, and nobody's gonna be like, dumbass. Like, no, none of that. You're canceled. It's done.
You're done.
We're moving forward. Anyway, so do you want to talk a little bit about why, I mean, we've said it a lot, but we should just reiterate why reporting like this is dangerous?
Reporting like this is dangerous because I'm getting inundated.
I have notes. Go to the notes, girl.
Oh, okay. Oh God, because I was like, oh, I got a lot to say and I got to organize all of it.
Oh no, I helped you.
Thank you so much.
Here we are. I want everyone to feel supported here.
So the power of media to shape public understanding and policy. I'm guessing that what you're saying by this is that, that reporting in this way can then impact policy if that becomes accepted.
Yeah, so basically Sociology 101 talks about how the media is one of the major arms of socialization. And so the media has a moral duty to society to contribute to the public good, but nobody is holding them to that standard. And so we get shit like this.
Yeah. And what's kind of crazy is that it says it shapes public understanding and policy. And what's interesting about this specific administration is that their whole thing is discrediting media sources. So that's an interesting kind of dynamic. Like I wonder
except for the ones that are peddling fresh snake oil.
No, so I'm thinking that, but I'm wondering something like the New York Times. Like I don't really know. And maybe
it's the New York Times Magazine.
So is that like typically, is that the kind of thing that the Trump administration would be like, we don't like them?
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, like, I would be interested.
Also, Paul is a Canadian. Has he been in this country recently?
I don't even know. But my thought is
important.
Yeah, this is important information to know. And my thought is that it's interesting because you're like what you're saying is like there's only certain news outlets that are approved by the administration because it's peddling the stuff that they want to peddle and mongering the fear that they want to monger. And I wonder if something like the New York Times, like if they started publishing more stuff like this, especially given, the health secretary's response to autism, I wonder if they would all of a sudden change their tune. It'd be interesting. Yeah. Sarah's having a moment,
Oh, that would be extremely disappointing.
but like kind of expected. I wouldn't be
I
surprised.
mean, capitalism, baby.
Oh,
It would
actually,
be a good meme. We can the New York Times and like put it on that capital meme. Anyway, I'm sorry.
oh,
I'm meme formatting in my
I
head.
love a good
and I
meme.
can't give
Wait, but
context.
also
I
really
can't.
quick, I know we're in like this reporting being dangerous
We
thing,
should
but I really
segue.
feel like this is a good, yeah, a really quick segue, and then we can come back. So I'm talking about like the Trump administration's, well, like the health
Yeah,
secretary's
because
response.
also, like, all of this is just going to contribute to an increase in stigma, like a reduction in people seeking treatment, a reduction in people seeking diagnosis, like emotional harm, physical harm, like bullying, people getting open. And so far, we've just been talking about ADHD, but like also very much the neurodivergent community has been taking multiple fucking hits this Autism Acceptance Month.
I know.
The
For the health
autism in me
secretary,
is not feeling very accepted right now.
no, let me tell you, what the fuck happened with RFK Jr. and his, I think it was like, it was some press thing where he was talking about like what the Department of Health and Human Services is doing. And I feel like most of the people who are listening to this probably already know what's going on, but like real quick, just to give everyone else the lowdown, Mans went on and his like forefront of like what he's trying to figure out is to solve autism by September. And his claim is that autism is an epidemic that is not caused, that is not a biological or genetic thing, and that there's actually environmental factors that give someone autism. And it says that there are like 2-year-olds that all of a sudden stop being normal and start being autistic, and that it has to be from environmental stuff. Because he would like one of the things that he said, like this is not like the main thing. One of the things that he said is that like, oh, we know that it's environmental because there are children that are like when all of a sudden when they turn 2, they just act completely different. And I'm like, is that not just like a child developing?
Yeah, that's just a fundamental misunderstanding of how childhood development works. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because what we actually see in autistic children is like a spiky profile. So they might be really good at one thing, like talking or moving, and they might be really bad at other things. Like that's why we see, and I'm using the term good and bad, and that was super lazy of me. Oh my gosh, more dead ableist language.
Oh my God.
I can't even talk about this. But then we also see things called skill regression, where like they start to lose skills. You might start to lose language all of a sudden. And we also see that with autistic adults who are experiencing burnout. Might actually just be related to like, not trauma, but like discomfort and like your needs not being met.
That's exactly what I was saying.
So, like, yeah, I mean, psychiatric conditions and mental health symptoms can be worsened by your environment. But like, it's not the full picture.
It's not.
We already had this debate, nature versus nurture. Like it's a very like Psych 101 debate, nature versus nurture. Like it's both. Actually.
Yeah, and
we've been at it for a couple hundred years, and we've determined that it's both.
It's both. No, and like even like
catch a bubble.
What?
Catch a bubble.
I don't even know what that means.
It means shut the fuck up.
Catch a bubble. But what I was gonna say is that like this is the same thing that was talked about like in the ADDitude article that Tough misquoted was saying that this is no even like in ADHD people this is normal where it's like there's skill regression and there's times where like you're more symptomatic than others. This is just, and I'm sure even people who are neurotypical have times where they're like better at something and like have have a strength come and go or a skill come and go. I think that's just probably normal human variability. But kind of steering back to like what RFK Jr. was doing, not only going against the science, similar to Tufts' article of like what autism is, like he's saying that it's like some environmental thing, but he's also pathologizing autism further, saying that it's something that like we need to like figure out where it comes from, and like but also at the same time like removing support from from research that goes into like
there's a whole ton of issues with what is being said right now. But I think What is important for people to really hear from this? Because they've heard it.
I,
You
I,
know, they've
I
heard it a million times, right?
I think I have a few, like I actually haven't said the two main things that I think is most important. So yeah, he's very much pathologizing autism and also saying that it's environmentally based, even though we know it's not. But what's even worse is he said that we need to move away from the ideology that autism rates are going up because we understand it better, that they're actually going up because there's something in the environment and that this is an epidemic. And not only has like circular
Right.
logic where he's saying that like it's an epidemic because it's not genetic, but then saying that it's not genetic because it's an epidemic, but then also then again he's saying that we should move away from the idea that like we're understanding it better and that's why there's more diagnoses when that's quite literally the reason. Like rates are going up because we have a better understanding about what autism is. We have better diagnostic tools. And yeah, like when I say a better understanding of what it is, I mean that like we're including more experiences and it's not.
Yeah, really funny how autism only became an epidemic when we started including brown people and girls.
True.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. And then on top of it, it's also clear that what he's talking about is also people with autism that have intellectual disabilities. Because he went on this whole thing where, well,
Yes.
first of all, he said like children, like children are our biggest resource, which like weird to call children a resource. But then also
Yeah,
the
we
first,
usually call them the future, but okay.
that's a
Go
choice.
off.
Go off. But then also and like he had a list of reasons about like how these children are not going to experience life. He said like, oh, they won't be able to go on a date. Oh, they won't be able to like write
There's literally
poetry.
a show about that, dude.
I know, but so
Grow next to you, also.
yeah, I was like, recently there's been a lot of talk about how Elon Musk be having baby mamas, and I'm like, I wonder how he's reacting to all of this. But the thing is like not only is it clear that he's mostly has this very like stereotypical view of autism, and also it seems like he's also talking about like people who are autistic that also have intellectual disabilities, which is I think it's like less than 40%. But that's also like these are still real people, and to talk about them like they are like again things that are untrue about them and talk about them like they're some kind of resource. And the first thing he said on that list was that these are kids who can't pay taxes and that his value of people is their ability to
Saying the
contribute.
quiet part out loud. Bold.
Bold. And thing I wanted to reference too is that do you know who Jim St. Clair is?
No, teach me something.
He wrote a book and was going on talk shows about this too, but also was one of like the first biggest like um, autism activist because he also has autism. And he wrote a book called Don't Mourn for Us, where the whole thing is like the whole thesis of the book is we are here and we are living our lives and we are happy. So don't mourn for us. Mourn for the idea that you had for us. And I think that so perfectly goes into like what RFK Jr. was talking about. Like you're saying like, oh, these are kids who like can't write poetry and can't go on dates, which one isn't true, but two, even if that were true, like these are people who are still human, who are still living their lives, and it just might look different from how you live your life or what's the highest priority in your life. Yeah.
I think that's really beautiful, and I'm glad that you reiterated that because that's super true. Not everybody's vision of life is the same. Like, that's why we have things like free will and personality and likes and dislikes. I am not gonna feel bad for you because you don't like chocolate.
Yeah. Like,
I don't have to agree with you,
yeah.
but that's an opinion.
Yeah, you just don't value that
But there
experience.
are some things that aren't opinions, like does ADHD exist? Do
I-
stimulants work?
And I think that it is important probably to understand like RFK Jr.'s probably like mindset, and kind of like where like just to get kind of better understanding of like how does this person maybe come to this kind of conclusion. But I don't know if you wanted to.
Oh, yeah, again, assuming positive intent. I think it's really difficult in this case, but it's really important to remember like the family context in which this opinion comes from. RFK Jr. comes from a family that literally lobotomized somebody for depression and then institutionalized her for the rest of her life. I'm not sure if most people even know about Rosemary Kennedy, but she is no longer with us. If you want to read about her life, you can do so. Yeah, there's like, and this could be our future also, if we continue to let this rhetoric and this misinformation sort of spiral out of control. So that's why we're here. I really appreciate everyone who's been able to like sit with us through these feelings, but then also sort of maybe learn about this for the first time.
Was there anything
There's
else?
room for disagreement here, like I was just saying, but we can't conflate opinions and facts. We can't afford lazy reporting. People in this community are already disadvantaged enough to where real harm will come from this article and RFK Jr.'s comments. Real people
And
will
actions.
die from this, and only the most privileged among us will be shielded. And that's their neurodivergent report. That's the state of the world, y'all.
That's the current events.
That's the current events. That's good.
That was
It's so
such
simple.
like a mic drop moment, Sarah.
But the way you ended it was also like chef's kiss.
Oh my goodness.
And that's the current events, like, and cut. Thank you for being here. If you want to connect with the Neurodivergent Report, you can find us at ND Report Pod on Instagram, Threads, TikTok, and YouTube. If you're looking to support the show, the best thing you can do is to subscribe and leave a 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice. Please. You can check out ndreportpod.com for more information, or if you want to be a guest contributor. Until next time, be well, do good.